And welcome, fellow believers, searchers of truth, seekers of wisdom, and travelers on the road to parts unknown. Pull up a chair and have a seat near the fire, and we'll begin. Tonight's offering is on that spookiest of all superstitions, Friday the 13th. Don't mind my weak sound effects there. So tonight, my fellow Mavens of Mystery will be discussing a superstition dating back to at least October 13th, 1307. That's right, going back 7 centuries to Friday the 13th. And it is said that even people in the East, such as the Hindus, believe that a gathering of 13 people in one place was considered unlucky, and the Turks, as a result of their disdain for the number, nearly had it removed from their vocabulary. In fact, it appears that the Hindus were the first people to hold this belief. However, this has nothing to do with the day of the week being a Friday, but with the number 13 itself, the tales of which we'll cover in a minute. The actual convergence of the day, commonly known as Friday, and the 13th day of a particular month seems to actually exacerbate superstitious agitation in the minds of many people, even in this modern era. Like a spiritually transmitted disease, these superstitions can take root and grow, distracting us and taking up residence rent-free in our minds, causing us fear and anxiety. It would seem that though as a civilization we have progressed scientifically, that culturally we are no wiser than those ancestors of ours, who, in their ignorance and irrational fears, trembled at the invention of their own paranoid thoughts. Then again, our ancestors weren't really ignorant or irrational, because as we'll come to learn, as with most superstitions and traditions, the apprehension surrounding Friday the 13th does have its roots in both cultural legends and documented history. So perhaps our ancestors were not so ignorant after all. So, the number 13. In the region of the world known as Scandinavia, the Vikings of old believed that 13 was an unlucky number, as a result of the death of Baldur the Good, considered to be the god of light in the Norse pantheon of mythology. Now, in this particular legend, it is stated that 12 gods were invited to a banquet held in the Great Hall of Valhalla. Unfortunately for the gods, Loki, the god of evil, showed up, uninvited, and they only had 12 plates of mutton and not nearly enough meat to go around, so being, as we just said, the god of evil, he was having none of it. How dare they exclude him from the list of invited guests, and then, to top it all off, he had to deal with the whole indignity sober, too. So, while the gods were making sport by throwing various objects at the invulnerable Baldur, Loki armed the blind winter god Hod, that's H-O-D, God Hod, right, with a shaft made of mistletoe, which was Baldur's singular vulnerability. Mistletoe. Now, the legend doesn't really say, but if the Norse gods were anything like us, you know that some of them were just there on the off chance that something would actually hurt him. It's sort of like watching someone messing with a wild animal and secretly hoping that something unexpected happens. Not major, just a reminder that sometimes we human beings can be real dumb. Sorry about that. I don't know where those beeps come from. Well, with this singular mythical act, both malice on Loki's part and complete innocence on the part of Hod, the god, the number 13 was vilified in the consciousness of Scandinavians from the day the legend was first spoken until today. It's believed that in many early patriarchal religions, the number was considered unlucky by priests, in direct opposition to the goddess worship practiced by many ancient and even prehistoric cultures, because the number was said to have represented femininity. I'm just going to wait here for a second for the patriarchy to step in, and wait a sec. Oh, here they come. The reason given for this is that the number corresponded to the number of lunar or menstrual cycles in a year. Ladies can't seem to catch a break, I tell you. They even get blamed for unlucky 13 because of the monthly visitor, blamed for their biological functions, while men have lived since time immemorial, getting away with things like traumatizing their kids by having them pull their finger before ripping aloud and proud. But seriously, we also know that pagan beliefs are not the only ones with the fear of the number 13. In fact, as we shall soon discover, the actual origin of the superstition of Friday the 13th has its roots in Christianity. In relation to Judeo-Christian beliefs and traditions, the number 13 is unlucky as it is the number of attendees at the Last Supper held prior to the crucifixion of Christ on a Friday. Now here for the first time we see the convergence of both the number 13 and the day of the week known as Friday, or Good Friday. Specifically, though, in this case, they appeared to have missed each other by a day, as the Last Supper would actually have occurred on Maundy Thursday. But while investigating the customs behind Friday itself being unlucky, we can come to the traditions, and the exact dates of which are lost in antiquity, but the traditions that many unfortunate biblical events took place on a Friday. And though the eras in which these superstitions took hold when they originated, those are unknown, the tradition that Friday is unlucky has actually been traced back to the time of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So I guess that's pretty far back. It supposedly was on a Friday that Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and were banished from the Garden of Eden. Biblical scholars have reason to believe that the Genesis flood also began on a Friday, and that the unified language of man was forever divided by God at the Tower of Babel on a Friday as well. It's also accepted by biblical historians that Friday is the day on which the Temple of Solomon was destroyed by the invading force led by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And to this day, it's considered a day of penance by many Christian denominations. But let's get to the part where all of this converges. Friday, the number 13, and just being really, really unlucky. So, the basis for the actual superstition of Friday the 13th, the combination of the number and the day, really isn't a convergence, but a single catastrophic act carried out by the sinister alliance of a king and a pope in the early years of the 14th century. Now, just a hint for most of you out there, when you're reading about historical events and they involve both a monarch and a religious leader, there's usually a lot of fighting involved, maybe some chanting, lots of hypocrisy. Just saying. That was on Friday the 13th when the Knights Templar, a Catholic order of warrior monks, which were formed during the Christian Crusades, also known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, long name there, were decimated. The events took place on Friday, October 13th, in the year 1307. Pope Clement V, in the pocket of Philip IV, King of France, was worried that the state would beat the church to the punch. that they'd get him first. So he actually sentenced the Knights Templar to death after accusing them of heresy, blasphemy, and various other charges. What began with mass arrests and an early morning raid that left several thousand members of the order, including knights, sergeants, priests, and serving brethren, in chains, charged with heresy, blasphemy, various obscenities, particularly the worship of a demon known as Baphomet. You've probably seen him somewhere before, hopefully on a screen or in a book and not, in person, like in a dark alley or at the podium in a room full of chanting people with dark cloaks, or trapped inside a circle of salt just waiting for someone to mess up and break it, thus setting him free and ushering in the apocalypse. Yeah, that guy. Yeah, he's the goat-headed guy, usually depicted as sitting down with two snakes wrapping around his dingus and sometimes represented with gynecomastia instead of manpex. Not kidding, look it up. At any rate, the Templars were also accused of homosexual practices, cannibalism, worshipping a talking severed head in a pool of blood, and the list of charges goes on. Well, their trial ended in torture, crucifixion, and death, and it's estimated that over 2,000 members, though some go as high as 5,000, members of the order were arrested, with only 20 of their number escaping. But our story isn't over yet, because this being a tale, albeit a true one, from the Middle Ages, and because it's already got satanic worship, goatman gods, warrior monks, and the worst crime of all, being wealthier than a king in a church, there's also a curse. That's right, a curse. And it's legit. So under Philip's orders, the high command of the Templars were tortured for several years. Not hours, not days, but years. All the while charging the knights for their upkeep for the period of their imprisonment. It's kind of like getting your car towed and then having to pay while it's impounded, right? It's kind of a bummer. So on March 14th, 1314, now this is about 7 years later, right? 7 years later. Two of the leaders of the order were burnt to death publicly on a slow fire. Slow fire, not burned quickly. None of the charges levied against the order were ever proven, even in France, and the order was found innocent elsewhere. But in the 7 years following the arrests, hundreds of Templars suffered excruciating tortures intended to force confessions. And over 100 died under torture or were executed by being burned at the stake. It is commonly believed that the order was persecuted for their land and monetary wealth, as well as their authority and popularity with the public, rather than for any actual heretical acts. And an interesting fact of note is that before his death, the Grand Master Jacques de Molay is documented as having prophesied the death of the king and the pope, inviting them both to follow him within a year. And they did, and both were dead inside of 1 year. Pope Clement died about a month later on April 20th. And according to some sources, however, the curse wasn't done with him yet, because apparently as his body lay in state, there arose a great thunderstorm like nature giving life to wrath, and a bolt from the sky struck the church, setting it ablaze, destroying the body of the Pope who unjustly condemned de Molay. Now the curse gave Philip a little more leniency, if it can be called that. He lived for another 7 months, when while hunting in the forest, he suffered a stroke, dying a few weeks later on November 29th. They both died within a year in 1314. Coincidence? Well, as Victor Hugo once wrote, vengeance comes from the individual and punishment from God. The great treasure of the Templars was never located, and the day was said to have been cursed, an evil day, by those who sympathized with the order. And thus we see once again that superstition does not always have its roots in just myth and legend, but also in strange and mysterious events. Join us again around the bonfire next episode as we share more timeless tales and historical mysteries as we walk down another path at the edge of the unknown.